Greg Piefer is CEO of Shine. As Kathleen said, Greg Baker is executive partner at Alumni Ventures and the founder of Bascom Ventures, also from Alumni. And I'm just going to jump right in. There are a lot of new faces in the audience, new to Fusion and also probably new to Shine. And so I will ask Greg Piefer to describe what's different about Shine's approach to getting to Fusion, and maybe answer some of the skeptics for those who have addressed, maybe critics for those who have addressed that approach. And I'll let you take it from there, Greg.
Yeah, awesome. So I think actually a lot of people here might know our story, but for those who haven't heard it, it goes back sort of the same reason that everybody else has started a fusion company. We want to change the way humans make energy, and I think fusion is the way that is the future for humanity, essentially. When we master it, we will eliminate energy fuel as a constraint on human growth and unlock a whole other chapter of human evolution. So we're here for the same reason, I think, that everybody's here. The difference is a bit in our approach to solving that problem. You know, so I got a PhD in nuclear engineering, and my whole group's function was to essentially understand the engineering challenges associated with building fusion power plants. So we looked at materials challenges, we looked at cost implications of building these very complex machines. And after spending several years studying that and working really hard on it, my conclusion, at least at that time, was it's going to take a lot of money to make fusion cost competitive, sort of where we can produce energy for like 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And it was so daunting to me at the time that I had started to seriously question whether or not I had spent my time wisely. I thought I'd made a huge mistake, actually, in going to grad school to study fusion. And there may be some people in the room who remember talking to me about that back then. But I had some advisors who planted this idea with me, which is there's other things you can do with fusion short of making energy, and that those things could add value to the world. And so I gravitated toward that. And I said, maybe we can build into fusion, similar to how other deep tech companies have scaled over time, which is you find very quickly if there is a product you can take to market. And once you take that product to market, you can use that opportunity to get better and better at building the product. And as you get better and better at building the product, it becomes less expensive. And as it becomes less expensive, you can scale and access new larger and larger markets. And so this was an idea that, I had started another business and I'd learned how to scale a company that way. And I had this idea that you could do other things with fusion. Those ideas kind of came together. And then it was reinforced by books like Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 and things like that, where essentially talk about building companies in a bit of a contrarian kind of way. And so we decided to look like, okay, fusion makes energy and everybody's focused on that, but it also makes these particles, either charged particles or neutrons, depending on the reaction. And so we wanted to look at the reaction holistically and say, where can we sell it for the most money per reaction? That's probably the best entry point for a market. And we quickly understood that neutrons could be sold for a lot more money than energy could be sold. So if energy is worth about 5 cents a kilowatt hour, if you're lucky for heat, that same kilowatt hour of DT fusion produces enough neutrons where you could sell those to certain customers for a couple $100,000. Okay, so that's a massive differential, 5 cents versus $200,000 in terms of how much you can get paid. And so I said, let's do that. And the other benefit of it was because energy wasn't the product, you didn't need to be Q greater than 1 to go to market. Right? I think everyone's chasing Q greater than 1, and I think that's because people are focused on energy. But you actually don't need Q greater than 1 from an energy perspective to sell neutrons or to sell protons or the other charged particles. So the idea was we would simplify the system, we would go to market, and we would build into complexity over time, and we would make the technology better and better over time. But by practicing and investing, we would make it cheaper. Now, overlaid with this technical vision, there had to be a commercial vision. And so the other thing we did was identify at cost breakpoints along our curve. So we expect the cost of fusion to sort of drop over time. Where there were thresholds, we said if we could get the cost down to this amount per kilowatt hour, this amount per kilowatt. There were new markets we could access. So I mentioned $200,000 per kilowatt hour. It's actually like there's a very important market there for testing and defense and electronics and all things like that. But it's a small market. It's a few $100 million per year. But we knew that if we could get fusion to cost a little bit less, we could now use neutrons to change matter from low value forms into high value forms. And there's an awesome market for this in the field of medical isotopes, where you can use neutrons to turn everyday substances into medicine. And these medicines are so valuable that they're worth somewhere between $100 million and $1 billion a gram, depending on its function. And so we've been able to do that. We've demonstrated that cost profile. We have now invested in a plant, the largest medical isotope production facility in the world. That'll be able to produce about 20 million doses of medicine per year when it's up and running, and it will replace fission reactors with fusion neutrons as a primary way of producing them. So we've kind of demonstrated this idea now through a couple of different phases. We're going next to larger scale transmutations. This will allow us to recycle spent fuel from fission reactors. And it doesn't seem like necessarily a simple jump from making medicine to recycling nuclear waste, but it is. The most useful isotope in medicine is something called molybdenum-99, used in 40 million procedures every year around the world. Comes out of a fission uranium stream, which is nuclear waste, essentially. So we've learned how to mine that, recycle the uranium, and then fusion comes in on the back end where we can use it to make benign, the long-lived waste products that come from energy. So that's where we're going. That's our next step. I believe that technology does exist today. It needs to be industrialized. And that's where we've demonstrated ourselves again and again. For us, that gets us close to fusion power machines at that point. The complexity is similar. We're going to be sitting at, sort of that queue of one, probably a little less, a little more, doesn't really matter to make that work. We still should be getting paid about $1 per kilowatt hour, but we're going to be building these machines by the dozens. And so it allows us to continue to increase our manufacturing scale as we ultimately move into fusion power, which is the most demanding of all these markets. And I say that not only because it's 5 cents a kilowatt hour, but people get very unhappy when their lights turn off. And so you need to be really, really good at building fusion reactors, and you need to be really, really cheap at building fusion reactors. And for me, this wasn't just like a safe way to pursue fusion. It is the fastest way to commercial fusion. I have no doubt there are others potentially in this room who will get to Q Scientific or maybe even Q Engineering greater than one before we do. But our goal is to focus on commercial and get the most cost-effective systems first. So I think that somewhat addresses your point on the critics. The critics would say you're going too slow as a result of focusing on these other markets. I don't think so. I think the commercial challenges are real, having run commercial businesses and having to work with real customers. That's a heavy lift. And unless you're kind of thinking about them from the beginning, and serving them from the beginning, there's a lot of work, I think, from when you get to that break-even point to commercialization.
Thanks. And Greg Baker, how did Alumni get involved, and did this model factor into their involvement?
Mine's smaller, I guess. Does this work?
Here,
right.
would you like
really close, maybe?
Yeah.
Or you could use mine.
Sure.
Yeah, we can hand them off.
So, similar to Greg, thought he made a mistake studying fusion. I thought about going into nuclear engineering, and then someone pointed out that would be a mistake for me personally. It was kind of a slant, but so I got into investing and run some venture capital funds that are designed for a 10-year horizon. And a few years after we invested in Shine, I was in an argument with a colleague about making an investment in a small modular reactor fission company. She said, there's no way a venture capital fund should be investing in nuclear energy. And I said, I think we should. And she said, well, now you're going to tell me you've invested in fusion. Well, we did, like 4 years ago. Another person on our team said, wait, they're a fusion company? I thought they just made medical isotopes. And yeah, that's why we invested. You have a viable business model that makes sense for my business model. And we want you to be ridiculously successful. We like to think we had something to do with it. We have nothing to do with it. We're just providing some capital. But my customers are my investors, and I have to be cognizant of what I promised to them. So a lot of, especially in 2017, we invested for the first time. I didn't hear anyone saying fusion was producing energy in 2027 up here a few minutes ago. And I need to have a return to my investors, so Shine made sense. And I sold it internally as we're investing in a medical isotope company, not a fusion energy company. And it took several years for people to figure out internally that we had invested in a fusion energy company.
So there are a number of companies now that are really pushing or appear to be pulling ahead a little bit. And let's assume that if not in 27, in 2035 or 2040, one breaks through. That's no pun intended. What's the risk or what's the reward for that company that's first through?
Yes, I mean, it depends what that means, right? Is first through like, okay, we have built several reactors and we know they're super reliable and we can actually do power purchase agreements and serve the power purchase agreements with confidence. If somebody comes to market with that, then I think there's going to be tremendous demand for that technology. But it's not my view. It is not a winner-take-all environment. Fusion technology is in its infancy. There will be those disruptors that come and bring the next generation of technology following the first, and this is just going to continue for a long time. What the turning point we're on is that humans will now be able to switch essentially to become a nuclear-powered species overall without fuel limitations and some of the drawbacks of fission. And so, but I think this is like making it cost effective is the big challenge. And then after that, it's just going to get cheaper and energy is just going to become more and more prolific. Like I'm talking about like orders of magnitude increased access to energy over where we are now. So I don't think it's like a winner take all, but I do think if someone gets there and proves all the things that they need to prove, they could be one of the most important companies on earth, without a doubt, and could hold that position for a while if they continue to innovate, maybe for a long while.
And Greg, how important then is the leadership of that team? I mean, what do you see as the risk? As an investor, what do you see as the risk?
Not necessarily as an investor. I think part of the risk is if the leaderships of those teams are convinced they have to keep it themselves. There are going to be a lot of steps along the way, and people are going to stand on the shoulders of others that come before them to make this successful. This is critical advancement for the world. So it's such a huge market. There are going to be multiple winners, and the risk is that we get a little too competitive in the industry and try and be the winner, because there doesn't need to be. People will make a lot of money either way, whether they're first, second, or third, fourth, fifth. But if we get a little too competitive, it's going to be tough. It's going to delay things.
How much will AI accelerate this next stage, and how is Shine using AI right now?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows in terms of fusion. I do know that AI-based tools are certainly providing a much better way to keep an eye on what your company is doing and to make your company run efficiently. We've been working with some tools lately, that make running a company a bit more like playing a game of Civilization. You can see where all your resources are going and how what your returns and your performance are looking like. So I think there's some really cool things that are going to come out of that. In terms of like AI innovating outside of the known data set, I really have no idea. I don't have any reason to believe it's going to be good at that. From what I've seen when I go outside of data sets with ChatGPT, it goes pretty far off the rails. But when you're within data sets that it understands, it's very good at interpolating. So, I think some of the work on fusion control paradigms where you have data that say, here's what the fusion reactor looks like on one end, here's the other extreme, there's a few data points in between. Now you want a computer to tune the system within that parameter set, even real time. huge opportunity there. But my experience so far with AI is not that it's going to figure out the next technology to make fusion suddenly successful, not that it's going to invent the next material that, the essentially unobtainium that we need to make fusion power reactors work. I think it's probably still going to come from people. Thoughts?
I think that AI is going to make your day more productive, so that there are a lot of things that you get to do as the CEO of a fusion company that not exactly creating fusion. And by freeing up that time, it's going to allow you to progress somewhat faster. But yeah, if you start telling me that you're going to have fusion do the engineering, I might not participate in the next round. Kind of like that breakfast bar guy that was telling me about his AI. I know. Yeah, it's way on the edge of what they can do. So, but it can make your day-to-day tasks much smoother, and everyone on the team.
Yeah. It's good at the conventional stuff for sure, and I think even as it comes to project management and things like that, I think there's a lot of efficiency. I certainly know that from our past, we would have benefited from those tools 10 years ago.
How much further ahead do you think we would be with those tools had they been around 10 years ago, or when you started your company?
Yeah, I think I would have wasted less money. I say that kind of laughingly, but there's just a lot of and you talk about engineering, but I think and when it comes to new technology, I think you're right on the money. But there is no need to reinvent the wheel, and sometimes an AI would be awesome at going out and mining the internet for the best off-the-shelf part that can do a job I need to do, rather than us designing a custom part. And so that's something we did a lot of in the early days. We're like, okay, we need a part that's going to do a thing. We submit the thing to a vendor, and then the vendor goes out and tries to manufacture this part. It might be much better to find an off-the-shelf part that could be modded, right? That has millions of cycles on it already, and it's cheap, frankly. So, I think things like that, AI can be tremendously helpful with. I think it can be helpful with calculations as well. As long as it's got a good interface with the right calculational database, it can iterate quickly, right? So again, if you're working within and interpolating within known data sets, it can find optimal answers very, very quickly. And so you save you time, save you money. And I think, we had the misfortune of doing a massive project, essentially a mega project in nuclear, right in the middle of a pandemic. And, it was very hard to track what was happening with our company, with our vendors, with anyone, frankly. And I think if we had had some of those tools in place, we probably would have been able to diagnose and control the performance of the organization a lot sooner. So I would bet it would have probably saved us a few years and at least $100 million on the projects we've done so far. And, definitely looking forward to implementing those sort of things in the future.
I'm going to switch gears and bring it back to one of the points of this conference, which is the region, the Great Lakes region, and ask, what could public and private leaders in this region do to encourage the growth of this industry, the supply chain, the workforce? You're one of the, I think, if not one of maybe the oldest fusion company I don't know if it's in the world, but certainly one of the most successful and oldest. Maybe I'll put that qualifier on. And you're in the Midwest, and you're in this region, and you've chosen to stay, and you've put down roots, and you've built and continue to invest. And so, what more could be done, and what would you say to public leaders to encourage that this growth continues and that this region becomes and continues to become a leader in this industry?
Yeah, I think for us, so 2011. I know there are a few that have us beat, but that it's a while, right? And we've certainly adapted over time. I think to the extent of what the region can do, I think you need to create investment incentives. You need to create tax incentives. And you need to be really, really forward leaning from a community standpoint. So, nuclear. Some people just want to call it fusion and ignore the word nuclear, but ultimately it's going to come out that this is a form of nuclear energy, and communities are going to be afraid of that. And so you just have to be really forward and communicating with people, like why nuclear is actually not a bad word. And we did that, for example, when we deployed into Janesville, our Chrysalis facility. This was an NRC licensed facility, had the word nuclear all over it, was going to make nuclear medicine. We don't hide from the word nuclear. And I just, one of the reasons we chose that city was not only did the city leaders really recruit us and put forth a lot of economic incentives, but people from that region who lived there, right? Like where multi-generational families said, we want you here. And that means a lot to a technology company, especially one that's associated with nuclear. Because when the pitchforks and torches came out, and they pretty much did in our first public meetings, there's this undercurrent of reassuring voices from the community that are saying, no, this is a good thing. Now, we also held our own meetings a couple times a year and just let the public ask whatever they wanted, and we're super transparent with them. And eventually, we only had investors showing up at these meetings, so we called them off. But we have other meetings for that. But I think fundamentally, like the final missing piece is just like trying to create a market incentive, which I know some communities are doing, but like what's the assurance that fusion energy will sell? Even for us, like in our next phase of scaling, we want to recycle spent fuel, which would essentially allow fission to become a renewable resource, because you can recycle the waste again and again and again, and every time through the fission reactor, you make more plutonium, which can be burned again. And let's say we got half the premium that other renewable energy sources get, which is 2 cents per kilowatt hour on average. 1 cent per kilowatt hour makes recycling, everybody's a winner. So the recyclers, us, the fuel fabricators, the utilities, right? So things like that, incentives like that ultimately will make the pull from the end markets be there are really, really important. I think the challenge with fusion is just the timelines, and people gear up and do a lot of work, but is it going to be timely or not, I think is a good question.
Yeah, there's so many benefits that are going to come out just from the work that's being done. It was mentioned earlier, a lot of the components that you're developing will help in other ways. And as I said earlier, it's a huge benefit for society to get to fusion. So from a cost benefit analysis, I hope the government sometimes thinks about that. It's a great investment. More should be done, whether it's tax incentives or grants or loans. It's the right way. I'm sold.
Well, we have time for a couple questions. If anyone has questions, we have a microphone. Look them around. If there are no questions, I'll ask one more. Okay, so there are I see a lot of supply chain companies in the audience, some that are currently working with fusion companies, some that are not. The companies that are not, but are eager to, showing up obviously is, what Woody Allen's comment, 85% of life is showing up. So kudos to those who are showing up. What else would you say to those companies that are eager to work in fusion? How can they be successful? What do they need to be doing and thinking about to partner and be successful? And what does Shine do to help their vendors' success?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm going to start out by saying the negative, and then I'm going to try and turn it positive. It's tough to be a supply chain company, and we've discovered this in the medical isotope business as well. We're producing isotopes that will ultimately feed drugs, and drugs are where the real money is. And a lot of times, especially in an area like where our therapeutic isotopes are being sold, this is a new market, and it's a new way of treating cancer, and you're somewhat subject to the same risk that the drugs are subject to. In other words, if the drugs don't show up, your investments may be somewhat wasted, but you only get a small percentage of the prize. And so fusion energy supply chain companies have a similar challenge, which is, they're not going to have the upside of the fusion energy technology leader or producer, but and maybe they're going to get 10% of that or something, right? Some fraction of that, but yet they have to take a lot of the same risk, and maybe that risk is a bit diversified because hopefully they can supply multiple companies. I guess my advice would be, try to specialize in something. Just become super excellent at something. Like, pick a part of it. Don't try to be super broad generalist. Like, I think to Greg's earlier point, like, this is a hard problem. It's a really hard problem. And when we lick it, like, there's going to be a lot of winners. There are going to be a lot of winners. And so to the extent, like for me, if I'm looking to make a purchase or work with someone, I want to know that they are way better at it than I could ever be. Way better. It's the same principle that I try to apply when I hire people, and it would be exactly the same if I were going to hire a company. So I'd say find something that you can sell, to a few different companies or several different companies, and just become the world leader and become absolutely the best, unquestionably, and just have that really customer service focused mindset. Focus on the customer.
One of your targets is Molly 99, which my son actually works in that industry and knows that the supply chain's awful, and that trickles down to the hospitals. And with energy, you don't want your lights shut off. If you're going to be supplying this industry, you have to be consistent and excellent. And that's what you focus on. You're right. Focus on one thing. Don't try and be a little bit too, try and do everything poorly or adequately. Do a couple of things amazing. And I love investing in infrastructure type things, whether it's AI, not looking at specific applications. I'm looking at who's going to win no matter who wins. And in this industry, there's going to be a lot of things that are common across multiple companies that are going to be maybe not the most important, but close to the most important in the world. And there will be a lot of money. There's a lot of money to be made being the supplier to all of them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think we could put the the isotope story again, right? We do have the best isotope production technology on the planet, right? And even though there's drug binary risk around certain drugs, there's 100 different drugs now in clinical trials, all of which are going to require the isotopes that we make. So I think that's the thing. If you can kind of see common threads, reiterating that point in what other fusion companies are going to need and just be better at it than everyone else, you'll have no problem at all.
And then I would say about twice a week, I get an email or a call from someone in their 20s who finds me online or through a connection and says, you have some connection to fusion. How do I get involved in fusion? I mean, the people in their 20s are eager to basically fix the world that they're going to inherit. And there are some in the audience here.
Yeah.
I mean, more than I think we normally see at this event, which is wonderful.
It's awesome.
What do you say to that? How do they get involved? For both the technical folks in the audience and the non-technical, where do they lean in, and what would you say to them? Obviously, some of the advice for the supply chain applies as well, but what do you say to them, and how do they get involved? Not just come to Shine and get involved, but how do they lean into this industry?
Yeah, and I think you should have that, and I think you shouldn't lose that if that's what you're feeling, right? Like, this is where you want to change the world. This is where you want to have an impact. I think ultimately, we all need to make money. This is a capitalist world, and that's how things function and scale. But we are here for a purpose, and that is what makes it worth the work. And fusion's going to be work. It's going to be work. It's not going to be easy. So you should make sure you want to do it, and if you want to do it, then you should do it. And I think, again, it's fairly similar. Either become an expert in your field, or just like study not in school, like learn on the job. Go work somewhere. Like, it doesn't need to be Shine. Go tell someone how excited you are. This is magic words to my ears. Like, if I'm talking to someone there, like, I want to be part of this company. Like, you guys are doing the coolest stuff, and it's not enough by itself, but like, boy, it opens the door for ears at least to listen. And I think, just kind of hone your skills. Fusion needs all kinds of people. It's not just engineers or anything like that. So if you're young and you're super excited, like, we want to hire you. I'm sure the other fusion companies want to hire you. I wouldn't recommend emailing me. I don't know if other CEOs are like that, but I don't read email much anymore. But we have an HR team that can certainly be contacted, and I do respond to people that I meet at these meetings in person. So that's the other thing I would emphasize is, in general, and this goes way beyond just applying for a job. And there's so much technology now, and people are so used to communicating with technology that something has been lost. And that personal connection is essential. And so I think if you want to vet someone, you want them to vet you, try and find a way to meet them in person. If it's at an event like this, fantastic. Otherwise, I think that's just going to before you're going to get, and it's like, I think it was like a Harvard study or something that said, like, if you're asking a difficult question, if you ask it in person, like 9 times out of 10, you get the result you want. And if you ask it over email, it's like 1 time out of 10. And, you know, if it's a phone call, it's somewhere in between. So, so I would just say, like, yeah, be really good at something, be really excited about it, and then talk to people in person.
That was perfect. All right, well, Greg, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.